You saw 3 fruits on that thumbnail, and somewhere in the back of your mind, you already recognized one of them. Maybe from a yard you played in as a child. Maybe from a bowl on your grandmother's kitchen table, the one with the chip on the rim. Here's the strange part. 3 of the fruits our grandparents ate without a second thought can actually help steady your blood sugar, the very thing we're now told to fear fruit for. For years I was terrified of fruit. My chart said limit it. So I limited it. I ate less of the food that grows on trees and more of the food that comes in boxes with promises printed on the side. But there's a study from 1988 printed in a medical journal called Diabetes Care that names one of these fruits directly. I'll tell you exactly what it measured, and the number will stop you. And every bit of this works right where you're sitting, with what you can buy at a market or grow off a fence, no prescription and no gadget. So let me take you back, because I think we didn't lose this knowledge. I think it was quietly taken out from under us, one generation at a time, and I want to hand it back. Let me start with the fruit I laughed at first, because I remember it as something sour that stained your fingers, not medicine. When I was a boy, my grandmother had a low, thorny bush by the side of her house that I was told never to touch without permission. In early summer, it hung heavy with little striped green globes, and she'd send me out with a tin pail to pick them, gooseberries. She made them into a tart pie that puckered your whole face, and a thick preserve she kept in the cellar in glass jars sealed with wax. I thought they were just an old country food, poor people's fruit, something you ate because you had a bush and not much money. But here's what nobody told me. That sour little berry my grandmother grew is one of the most powerful blood sugar foods that ever sat on an ordinary kitchen table, and almost nobody under the age of 70 in this country grows it anymore. There's a reason for that, and it is not the reason you'd guess. I'll get to it because it made me angry when I found it. First, what the sour does. That mouth-puckering tartness is the signal. Gooseberries are extremely low in sugar and extremely high in a soluble fiber and in plant compounds called polyphenols. When you eat food alongside that kind of fiber, the sugar in your meal doesn't hit your blood all at once. It slows down. It trickles in instead of flooding in. The Indian gooseberry, a close cousin the old world called amla, has been studied harder than most people realize. In a trial published in the International Journal of Food Sciences and Nutrition around 2011, people who took a measured amount of gooseberry every day saw their fasting blood sugar drop meaningfully over just a few weeks. We're not talking about a tiny wiggle. We're talking about a drop that would make a doctor look at your chart twice. And here's the piece that hit me. My grandmother didn't have that journal. She didn't have a single study. She just knew. She'd tell me the sour fruit was good for the blood, and I rolled my eyes because I was young and I thought old people said things like that to make you eat your vegetables. She was right. I was the one who was wrong, and it took me 60 years and a scare at the doctor's office to find it out. So how do you use it if you can get your hands on it? You don't need much. A small handful of fresh gooseberries, maybe a quarter cup, eaten with a meal that has starch in it, bread, potatoes, rice blunts, the rise that meal would normally give you. If you can't find them fresh, and I'll be honest, that's the hard part now. The dried berries work too, though you want the unsweetened kind, not the ones rolled in sugar to make them candy. But here's where the tension starts, because you're probably thinking the same thing I thought. Why can't I just walk into any market and buy a basket of these? Why did a fruit that grew on nearly every farmstead in America 100 years ago disappear so completely that most people my age have never even tasted one? Hold that question. I promise you the answer, and it's worse than laziness or changing tastes. Somebody decided we shouldn't have them. This one I didn't grow up with. I met it much later in the Southwest in my 50s. And I thought it was decoration. Picture a flat cactus paddle with bright red and purple fruits growing right out of the top edge like little pincushions. The prickly pear, the cactus pear. In Spanish, they call the fruit the tuna and the paddle the nopal. I saw it growing wild along a roadside in Arizona, and I thought, huh, who on earth eats that? Turns out people had been eating it and healing with it for longer than this country has existed. And in the 1980s, doctors in Mexico decided to stop treating it as folklore and actually measure it. A physician named Alberto Frati Munari ran a series of studies on people with diabetes. He had them eat broiled prickly pear cactus, the paddle, and then he measured their blood sugar over the hours that followed. The results were printed in black and white in that journal, Diabetes Care. In some patients, blood glucose fell by roughly 17 to as much as 40+% after eating it, compared to eating nothing or eating a placebo. Let that sit for a second. A cactus that grows in dirt so poor nothing else will live there, dropping blood sugar by that kind of margin. Free food, growing wild, doing quietly what people now pay a fortune every month to manage. Why does it work? The prickly pear is loaded with a thick, sticky, soluble fiber and a type of pectin, plus those same polyphenols. It's so full of gel-forming fiber that when you eat it before or with a meal, it physically slows how fast sugar crosses from your gut into your blood. It's the same principle as the gooseberry, but in the prickly pear, it's turned up loud. And here's the lived part for me. When I finally tried it, cooked simply the way an old woman at a market showed me, tender and a little tart, almost like a green bean crossed with a melon, I remember thinking, this is not medicine, this is just food. And that's exactly the point. It was always just food. We're the ones who forgot that food used to be the medicine, and the medicine used to be free. Now, you can find the paddles, the nopales, in many markets today, often already cleaned of thorns. You cook them like a vegetable, grilled or boiled, and eat a small serving with your meal. The fruit itself, the sweet red tuna, is higher in natural sugar, so with that one you go gentle. But the paddle, the green part, that's the workhorse. So now you've got two fruits, two solid pieces of the puzzle, and both of them raise the same nagging question louder than before. These aren't exotic. These aren't hard to grow. One of them is literally a weed that thrives on neglect. So why did our grandparents know these and we don't? Therefore, I have to stop dancing around it and tell you what I found, because this is where I got genuinely upset. The gooseberry and its cousin, the currant, didn't fade away because people stopped liking them. They were banned, legally banned, in the United States by federal law. Here's what happened. Around 1911, the federal government passed regulations to protect the timber industry, specifically the white pine, which was enormously valuable lumber at the time. It turned out that a certain tree disease needed both the pine and a plant in the gooseberry and currant family to complete its life cycle. So, rather than manage it carefully, the decision came down to wipe out the gooseberries and currants. Crews were actually sent out to rip the bushes out of the ground across whole regions of the country. Think about what that does over time. My grandmother's generation grew these everywhere. Then the law came. The bushes got pulled. A whole generation grew up, never planting them because you legally couldn't. By the time the federal ban was lifted in 1966, more than 50 years had gone by. 50 years. Long enough that the knowledge died with the people who'd held it, long enough that when you and I came along, nobody even thought to hand us a gooseberry because nobody around us remembered them either. That's how you lose a healing food. Not with a big dramatic moment. You just make it illegal for long enough that everyone who knew it dies, and the silence does the rest. And it wasn't only the law. Once the bushes were gone from the yards, the food companies were more than happy to fill the empty space. Why would anyone sell you a plant that grows itself for free and helps your blood sugar when they could sell you something in a package instead, something you have to buy again next week and the week after that for the rest of your life? That's the shift that made me angry. We didn't upgrade from the old fruits to something better. We got talked out of things that worked and into a lifetime of buying. But knowing that made me hungry to find out what else got buried. And that led me to the third fruit, the one I want you to remember most, the one I saved for the end on purpose. Before I get there, though, I need to talk to the person watching this who's already shaking their head, because I can hear you. And every bit of this is the kind of knowledge I've spent years pulling back into the light, which brings me to something I want to share with you for just a moment. I've put together a guide called Start Strong, and if this resonates with you, it goes much deeper into the forgotten foods, the old techniques, and the simple systems our grandparents used to stay steady and strong without a pharmacy on speed dial. It's the buried library I wish someone had handed me decades ago, and I wrote it so that anyone, wherever they're sitting right now, can open it and start today. You'll find it linked in the description below. Now, back to the second fruit, and this is the one with the number from that 1988 study I mentioned. Maybe you don't have a yard. Maybe you're in an apartment or a small place, or you're not able to get out and hunt down a Mexican market or a cactus paddle. Maybe money is tight this month and the idea of buying special fruit feels like one more thing you can't manage. I want to speak directly to you now because this next part is built for exactly your situation and it costs almost nothing. Here's the truth I wish someone had told me years ago. You do not need the fresh, hard-to-find fruit to get most of the benefit. The old-timers didn't have fresh fruit year-round either. They lived in a world of hard winters and no refrigeration, and they figured out how to carry the medicine of summer through to spring. They dried it, and they steeped it. A small spoonful of dried, unsweetened berries, gooseberry, or even ordinary tart dried cranberries or dried tart cherries you can get at almost any store eaten right before a starchy meal does real work. The dried tart cherry is another quiet one, by the way. Cherries carry the same family of deep-colored polyphenols, the anthocyanins, that studies keep linking to steadier blood sugar. And they're sitting right there in the baking aisle, ignored, while people walk past to buy something with a health claim printed on the front for 5 times the price. And here's the technique that costs you nothing but hot water. You steep a tea, take a fruit or a leaf that carries these compounds, pour hot water over it, let it sit 10 minutes, and drink it with or just before your meal. Our grandmothers steeped everything. They steeped what they had, and they drank it because it made them feel better. And it turns out the feeling was real chemistry. You don't need a special kettle. You don't need a subscription. You need a cup, hot water, and 10 minutes. That's the whole apparatus. If you have a stove and a spoon, you already own everything this requires. Nobody can take this one away from you because there's nothing to sell. And that brings me, finally, to the third fruit. The one I think is the most forgotten of them all. The one that once grew in so many backyards that children's hands and shirts were stained purple every June, and that today most people under 70 have never knowingly eaten. The mulberry. I remember the tree. My aunt had one hanging over her back fence, and the fruit dropped all over the ground and stained the concrete, and the grown-ups grumbled about the mess. We kids ate them straight off the branch, warm from the sun. Nobody called it healthy. Nobody called it anything. It was just the messy tree in the yard. I had no idea I was eating one of the most studied blood sugar plants in the world. Here's the secret, and this is the part I dug for. There's a compound in the white mulberry, in both the fruit and especially the leaf, with a long name, 1-deoxynogeromycin. You don't need to remember the name. You need to remember what it does, because it's almost unbelievable. That compound blocks the specific enzyme in your gut that breaks table sugar and starch down into the simple sugar your blood absorbs. In plain words, it stops some of the sugar in your meal from ever being absorbed in the first place. It doesn't just slow the sugar down like the fiber does. It reaches in and shuts part of the doorway. This isn't old wives' talk. Japanese researchers zeroed in on this compound decades ago, and it's been studied seriously by agricultural and medical scientists, including work connected to the United States Department of Agriculture. In a study printed in Diabetes Care around 2007, people given mulberry leaf extract before a sugary meal had a noticeably lower blood sugar spike afterward than the people who didn't get it. A smaller rise, a gentler curve, from a leaf off a messy backyard tree that people curse for staining their driveway. And here's the thing that gave me chills when I put it together. The modern diabetes drugs that work by blocking that exact same gut enzyme, they were developed, in part, by studying compounds like the one that's been sitting inside the mulberry leaf the entire time. The tree in my aunt's yard was doing gently and for free a version of what the pharmacy now sells in a box. So how do you use the most forgotten fruit of the three? Two ways, and both are simple enough to start this week. If you can find a mulberry tree and once you know what to look for, you'll be shocked how many are hiding in old neighborhoods, parks, and along alleys because they were planted everywhere generations ago. You eat the ripe berries in season, a small handful, the way we did as children. They're low in sugar for how sweet they taste, and they carry the fruit's share of that compound, plus a heavy dose of those dark purple polyphenols. But the real quiet power is in the leaf, and this is where our grandmother's steeping habit comes all the way back around. Mulberry leaf tea. You can buy dried mulberry leaf today, cheaply, or dry your own if you have a clean tree. You take about a teaspoon of the dried leaf, pour hot water over it, let it steep for around 10 minutes, and drink it just before or with a meal that has starch or sugar in it. That timing matters. The compound has to be there in your gut when the meal arrives. Standing at the doorway, or it can't do its job. That's it. A cup of leaf tea before dinner. The most sophisticated blood sugar tool in this whole video, and it's a mug of warm tea made from a tree people rake up and throw in the trash. Now step back and look at what we've walked through, because the pattern is the real lesson. A sour berry my grandmother grew that turned out to be a fiber and polyphenol powerhouse, pulled out of American yards by law until the people who knew it were gone. A wild cactus that nothing wants to grow near, proven in real clinical studies to drop blood sugar by margins that would make a drug company proud. And a messy backyard tree whose leaf does, softly and for pennies, what modern medicine reverse engineered and put a price tag on. None of these is a miracle. I want to be honest with you, neighbor to neighbor, the way I'd want someone to be honest with me. Not one of these fruits replaces the care of a doctor you trust. And if you take medication for your blood sugar, adding these can actually stack with your medicine and push your numbers lower than you expect. So you tell your doctor what you're doing. That's not me covering myself. That's me respecting that you're a grown adult who's managed your own life for decades and deserves the full picture. But here's what I've come to believe after all of it. We were sold a story that the old ways were quaint and the new ways were progress, that our grandmothers were sweet but simple, and that real answers only come in packages and prescriptions. That story is backwards. Our grandmothers were running a system of quiet, cheap, effective knowledge that had been tested across more years than any clinical trial will ever run. They just didn't write it in a journal. They wrote it in a tin pail and a tart pie and a purple-stained shirt and a cup of steep leaves before supper, and piece by piece that library got closed. Not because it failed, because there was more money in the silence. I spent years on the expensive, complicated, buy it again, forever version of managing myself. I felt the whole time that something was wrong, that it shouldn't be this hard or this costly to do something people used to do without thinking. I was skeptical that anything as plain as a berry or a leaf could matter next to all that machinery. I was wrong. Being wrong about that is the best thing that happened to my health. So this week, do one small thing. Just one. Find one of these three. Steep a cup of mulberry leaf tea before your dinner. Buy a small bag of unsweetened dried tart cherries and eat a spoonful before your bread. Track down a Mexican market and ask for nopales, and let the person behind the counter show you how their grandmother cooked them. Any one of these is a door back into a room we were told was empty. Here's what you really recovered today. Not three fruits. You recovered the idea that the answer might not be something you have to buy, that it might be something you were simply talked out of remembering. And I think that makes you a certain kind of person, the kind who's done taking the expensive, complicated word for it, the kind who trusts what actually works on your own kitchen table over what's merely sold to you with a bright label and a monthly charge. If that's you, then you and I are the same, and there are more of us than they'd like. Now, I want to hear from you, and I mean this, because this audience knows things the internet forgot. Did your family grow gooseberries or currants before or after that ban I told you about? Did you have a mulberry tree that stained everything purple every summer? Tell me in the comments what fruit was on your grandmother's table that you never see anymore, and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because I read these and half of what I learned from you. And if you're the kind of person who wants the rest of this buried library back, the cheap, the simple, the things that quietly worked before we were taught to pay for everything, then come along with the rest of us who are digging it up together. Because next time I'm going to show you the forgotten kitchen herb our grandmothers kept on the windowsill that did the work of a whole shelf of today's supplements. And the reason it vanished from the sill is nearly the same reason the gooseberry vanished from the yard. We didn't lose this knowledge. It was set down, on purpose, where we couldn't reach it. And one memory at a time, we're picking it back up. I've shown you the gooseberry, but this was only the overview. Inside the Wise Living Circle, I continue right where this video left off, with the full season-long regimen. And there, you can ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen. And you can cancel anytime. No risk at all.